Kia ora and welcome to Purakanui estuary here. You can see I'm dressed up like a giant purple people eater and with my neoprene shoes, and I've come here today in search or with the purpose of Kaihaukai. And Kaihaukai is where we get to create something or create a dish, traditionally in Māori tradition around food, and be in nature, connected with nature, harvesting what we're here to harvest today, which is going to be cockles, shellfish, and then how that links into the culture and into the identity and into the whole ecosystem. So first few things that I just want to note. First one is just up the back of here is Mihiwaka, and that was the maunga, the mountain that I was standing on earlier, and how special that is. And that maunga is overlooking or protecting. And sometimes Māori talk about it's the cloak of Mihiwaka, and it's like the holding or the support or the overlooking of the other underlying areas. And so this estuary is one of those areas, and this has a lot of cultural significance in terms of we're here today to be able to harvest shellfish. There's flounder that comes in here, and that's people come out floundering here as well. There's a sense of identity of living in this place. There's little boat houses where I'm standing on a boathouse deck at the moment. There's little boat houses here, and people feel connected to this place. This is part of where they live. There's a small community here. But also the ecological value of this place and how important estuaries are. And we're going to talk a little bit about the role of cockles and how they are an important species that influences the ecosystem around them. In terms of harvesting today, we're going on an adventure. So the first thing that I need for my adventure is my kite. So this is a basket. I wove this probably 15 years ago now when I did a weaving course from harakeke or flax. Again, very traditional material, and from a sustainability point of view, fantastic. Like, look how durable this is still after 15 years. Harvested it from nature. There's no waste in this system, and if and when I'm done with it, then I can just pop it back underneath the harakeke bush and it'll biodegrade, and the nutrients that is locked into this material will biodegrade and will go back into the system, right? There's no waste. There's no waste in nature. Some cool tips and tricks for this one is that the holes here are just the right size for collecting shellfish of the right size. So we don't want to collect anything too small, and if anything was really small, it would fall through the holes. So we would know that that's too small to harvest. And why is that important from a sustainability point of view? Well, we don't want to be taking all the small shellfish because then it won't regenerate. So we aim for the big ones, or not the biggest, but the big ones, and that keeps the ecosystem alive and sustainable, essentially. Yeah, it's also a great material because it's water resistant, so lots of winds here. And we need to get somehow across the water. So this actually links into the whole experience, the whole identity, the whole feeling of being in this place. So in a few moments, I'm going to grab a stand-up paddleboard. I've done this a few times before. A couple of times I have fallen in and the paddleboard has blown down the beach. So we're hoping that today is not going to be one of those days. And it also reminds me of some of the memories I've had from this place. My flatmate and my good friend, we came out here. She's actually filming right now, so this is not the first time that we've been out here together. And we had one experience where we got so cold that there was actually vomit. Yeah, so it can get really cold here. It's really cold today. We just happened to choose the coldest day of the whole week. It was forecasted for snow down to 300 metres, and yet we're still out here and we're still doing it because we're here having an experience. This is what it means to be connected to our food and what it means for how we get to experience this place. So let's go on an adventure. I'm going to get the stand-up paddleboard and let's go get some cockles. So here is our harvest. You can see some cockles in here. This is a bivalve species, which means that it has two halves and it has a hinge at this part right here. It's a shellfish species. And then we also have some sea lettuce, a delectable algae. It's quite soft, easy to eat, and really nutritious, really good for you. So I'm going to let these soak overnight just so the sand will get all off them, and then I'm going to cook up a storm tomorrow. So here we are the next night, and we're getting ready to cook up the cockles and make a dish. This is my house, by the way, and this is the start of the process because I'm just heading out to the garden to grab some greens to go with the meal. So my connection to this food is that I'm growing it, and my flatmates and I got in here a couple of months ago and we got the beds ready, and this is the abundance of food that we have right now, and it's all organic and really nutritious. Organic food tends to be more nutritious. And I'm just going to say thank you, lettuce, and this is going to turn into the salad for tonight. My property here is not always highly manicured, as you can see, but yeah, I try and live off the land as much as I can. Here is our chicken run. We're just getting it ready for some chickens to come very soon. And the property is based on some permaculture principles as well. And one example of this is what we call the chicken escalator. So you can see that my property is on a massive hill, which can be really annoying sometimes and really helpful if you know how to work with it. So we put all the weeds and veggie scraps and everything at the top of the hill, and then the chickens rummage around in it and they dig, and gravity pulls it down, and by the time it gets to the end here, we've got some really beautiful soil that we can use to regrow the food. And of course it's got the chicken manure in it, which is really, really beautiful, rich and nutritious. Try to reuse as much as possible. So we've got tires as steers, little bits of wood that have been kicking around, rocks that we found on the property, and higher up there we have some fruit trees as well. So yeah, this is my little piece of paradise, and I'm lucky enough to be able to use it in this way to lower my impact just a little bit. So let's head inside and look at what we can cook. Well, here I am starting to prepare my dish, and you may have already been thinking like, hey, I thought she said that she was vegan in that other video. So yeah, I just want to clarify. Yeah, I'm vegan when I am in town and I don't know where the foods come from, but when I know how to harvest my food, or I do that, then I make an exception. And this links into my own values. So for me, the reason that I eat vegan is because I don't support the dairy industry or the meat producing industry, because I feel like they're two industries that are unsustainable for our planet, and could be doing or operating in more ethical and sustainable ways. So when I harvest food myself, that is the most sustainable that I can receive my protein, and I acknowledge the food before I harvest it. So for me and my personal values, being vegan mostly is more about the environmental and sustainable implications of eating a lot of meat and eating a lot of dairy than it is so much for animal welfare, although I do care about that as well. I guess in terms of priority, stake, or hierarchy of values, that's how they land for me. And yeah, so I'm really looking forward to these cockles. I am very grateful for these cockles. And yeah, it has a lot of meaning for me because I know where it comes from. And it also means that I have a lot of vested interest in looking after the ocean and the water quality, because if I get my food directly from there and my water from the mountain, then I want to make sure that it's clean enough for it to go inside my body. So let's see how this meal starts to unfold. Whoa. So here I'm just starting to clean off the last of what had been soaking overnight, and in the water that this was all soaking in overnight, I made sure that I fed that back into my garden. I watered my grapevine because seaweed is so rich in nutrients that you don't want to waste any of that water or any of that nutrients. And actually, to make a really amazing natural fertilizer for your garden, you can collect seaweed, let it sit there for a couple of weeks, and then pour it onto your plants. It's a super super concentrated version of very rich nutrients. And so this is how we can get alternatives than what you might normally put on plants. You can also do it with other plants if you don't live near the ocean. Cockles have a couple of really important functions of the ecosystem. So as well as providing food for people, cockles also remove nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon from the marine environment. So it helps to balance that out. And in coastal places, cockles are a bridge between ecosystem function and cultural values, because we know harvesting is a real cultural value, but so is their function and what they do and provide for their environment. So they have the regulating services of removing nutrients from coastal waters, mitigating disease, and increasing seabed roughness and modifying sediment erodibility. So what that means is that it can help keep the seabed together. All these hanging out. They live quite close, and they live just below the surface, so they don't live too far down, and generally they have about 3.5 hours of the tide out of the water. So that's when it's low tide, and then that's really easy for them to harvest. So lots of really important functions. I'll keep talking more about that as we start to cook them. Alright, that's just on the boil. So some other cool things about cockles is that they're not farmed, they're harvested. So it's not like maybe a mussel, if you're familiar with that, where that's farmed on big buoys and ropes in the water. Cockles just reproduce quite naturally, and they're quite abundant for us. Cockles can grow relatively fast, so they reach adult maturity after 2 years, and there are not that many places in New Zealand where you can commercially harvest them. There's Otago Harbour is actually one of them, and the reason that there's a quota for that is because they also use it for research, and they're measuring a lot of things. We have a marine studies centre very close in Otago Harbour. So Otago is the greater region of where Dunedin resides within. And then they either collect them by hand or with mechanical dredges. And that's considered a pretty sustainable way of doing it. It does disrupt the sand bed underneath, and we know that cockles are good at keeping the sand bed together. But bycatch is also quite low. So bycatch is anything that's not a cockle of the right size that you can then sell. And then, so a bycatch would typically be other small invertebrates or smaller cockles, and so they get returned back to the ocean. So it's a fairly sustainable practice, and of course there's customary, so traditional indigenous rights or quotas, and also recreational quotas or harvesting rights. So where I got mine, that's recreational, and anyone can go there and harvest within reason. So we talked about cockles being bivalves, being able to open like this. And why is that important? Well, it's important because they have the ability to suck in things. So they suck in organic matter So that's nutrients, tiny little invertebrates. And then also sediments, okay, that's inorganic matter such as sand. And they suck this in, and when they suck this in, it reduces turbidity in the water, so the reduces the movement of the water, and then they filter it, and it improves the water quality when it comes back out. The other cool and important thing is that they're really important for the intertidal ecosystem. So intertidal is that middle zone, so not the low tide, not the high tide, but the interzone in the middle. And when they absorb these nutrients and sediments, then they excrete back out. So they poo back out. That then settles down to the very bottom of the ocean, and that feeds these very tiny microorganisms that are so small we can't see them with the human eye, but are very important for the foundation of the ecosystem. Without these microorganisms, bigger organisms wouldn't be able to grow, and the life cycle and the web of life within that ecosystem wouldn't exist. So these guys do an amazing job of feeding that intertidal zone at the very bottom, which supports those microorganisms, which then supports everything else that comes from it. So a really important function in the ecosystem. And it's really cool to learn about these things because I have a cultural connection to this. I remember eating these when I was a little girl, but also now I can understand the wider context of how they fit into the bigger picture. And having more knowledge from both points of view helps me connect and respect what I'm consuming into my body. So I invite you to look at your creative project that you're creating, whether it's food or something else, from these different perspectives, and how can it enrich your connection and your understanding and what you are then able to produce and share with the world. Looking forward to it. So here is my final dish. So the cockles connects me to the ecosystem and the landscape. It's a very simple meal, helps reflect my connection to adventure and stories and people who were with me at the time of harvesting. I have fresh greens from the garden, again connecting me into the land where I live, production of food, my value of organics and nutrients and feeding my body with rich, nutritious, delicious, ethical, in-season and local food. I have some tea in the background that's got some herbs from my garden, which are just outside the door, and permaculture principle of having the things that you need close to your door. And so I have my tea garden just outside, and homemade sourdough bread that me and my flatmates make. So this is the final meal, and of course I get to share this as well, and my flatmates who are too shy to be on camera will be coming down just shortly, and I'll get to share this meal with them. This is my Kaihaukai, the reflection of my culture, my cultural identity. Eating this type of food from when I've been very young, who I am now, the stories I connect to, the people I connect to, the food that I eat, and how that reflects my values. And if I had produced this 5 years ago, it would be very different. I didn't have a garden, I didn't know how to make sourdough bread, I didn't buy organic flour, and I didn't even know where the cockle beds were. I didn't even know how to harvest. So this is a real reflection of me and how I've learned and grown over the years.